If you're in the mood for a tale of revenge, Robert Eggers' The Northman may just be what you're looking for. It's cold and violent, but is it good? Young Prince Amleth is on the cusp of becoming a man when his father is brutally murdered by his uncle, who then kidnaps the boy's mother. After fleeing his island kingdom by boat, the child vows revenge. 2 decades later, Amleth is a Viking berserker, where Osiris reminds him of his vow to avenge his father, save his mother, and kill his uncle. Now, this is a sort of reimagining of Hamlet, where we have a young prince whose father is killed by the prince's uncle. The uncle then marries the mother, and the boy vows revenge. I mean, that's pretty much the premise here also, but this is set in a more Norse environment. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly the story of Hamlet, but the similarities to the central premise are pretty unmistakable. The cinematography is absolutely stunning to take in. We have these sweeping landscapes, as you might expect, which capture the vast, cold beauty of Iceland. The camera is positioned to make the characters really tiny on the screen in an effort to maximize what we see on the horizon. It's daunting, but it's also beautiful. And then in some very characteristically Robert Eggers style shots, we get characters that are dead center in the frame and have just their head and maybe barely their shoulders captured. When the scenes utilize shots like this, but alternate between characters, it's eerie and even unsettling, like some of the characters are just able to peer directly into our souls. But even within that uneasiness, the look that's captured is amazing. There are also some long, continuous takes that are employed, and I'm always a fan of these because they're just so immersive within a scene. Alexander Skarsgård stars as the adult Amleth, and good grief, that dude is bulked up. I mean, he is massively muscled, but I love that the weight of all of the years of sadness have physically bent him so that he stands at sort of a hunch. It's a very powerful way to show the ramifications of emotional torment without directly saying anything about it. One day, when he's out raiding with the other berserkers, Amleth comes across Osiris, or a witch, who reminds him of his promise to avenge his father's death, and this then starts him on his determined path of revenge. He meets Olga, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, who's also teaming up with Eggers once again. Now, Joy is great in her role, combining power and spunk while putting on this meek facade. And I like the dynamic between Olga and Amleth because they both have a sort of fearlessness to them, making them very complementary to each other. Nicole Kidman plays Amleth's mom, and Claes Bang plays his uncle. I think each of them are going to surprise you in different ways with their characters because they're not always how they appear. Now, I'm not talking something hugely drastic, but there were elements to each of their personalities that I wouldn't necessarily have associated with them. Ethan Hawke plays Amleth's dad, and he's in this for only a very small portion of the movie. Now, for that portion that he's in, he's wonderful. I mean, he's very tough-edged, but he has this very big soft spot for his son, too. And he also doesn't live in this fantasy world, and he wants his son to be prepared for what the world could bring. Now, in a scene that addresses this, we also get to see a very unsettling but then amazing performance from Willem Dafoe. He's brilliant, but I don't want that image in my head anymore because his eyes just pierce my soul and it was unsettling. So this being a revenge story, you would expect there to be a fair amount of violence, and this definitely delivers the brutality. I mean, I really like that we don't always see the violence being inflicted, but we hear it, and then we're shown the aftermath. And sometimes this is worse than actually seeing the acts play out. There's one scene that involves a game, and let's just say that nobody wins in a headbutt. But for as many of the scenes that don't show the violent acts being executed, there are just as many that don't shy away from showing it to us. And more often than not, it will be this long blade slowly being inserted into, or maybe drawn out of, a body. There are also multiple times where characters just go full Marie Antoinette, but without the cake. And through all of these, the sound design is phenomenal. I mean, it captures the gore in vivid detail. We'll hear the crushing of bone, the sucking of a wound, or maybe just the blood gushing. It's gross and visceral, but it's really effective. The story is told in several acts or chapters, and I love the title treatments that we get. There's be this black screen with whitish runes, and then after a short bit, the English translation will appear underneath. I think it's a great aesthetic that helps to place us in the right time period. Now, sometimes the dialogue was a little hard to understand because the majority of the characters had thick accents, and then they were either typically whispering so as not to be overheard, or panting with just blood-soaked mouths after a tough battle. That's not to say that I couldn't understand anything of what was being said, but there were those occasional moments when the dialogue became muddled. Now, the pace of the story is deliberate and it's steady. We don't have a lot of downtime where it feels like nothing is really being accomplished. All the scenes are efficiently crafted to progress the narrative and not spend time on mundane or uninteresting story elements. And I was really shocked to find out that the movie was 2 hours and 16 minutes because it didn't feel that long at all. Something I forgot to mention was when I was talking about the cinematography and the settings, the color palette that's chosen really helps to establish the mood and the tone. For a lot of the film, grayer colors are chosen, and the production just has a look that feels slightly desaturated, giving off a very cold feeling to everything. But the great thing within this is that the contrast is cranked way up to give us these crushing blacks that are at times make portions of the background almost seem like they disappear. I mean, it's wonderful to see. And there are times also where more vibrant colors take over, typically showing us bright and deep reds, which are visceral but great to view. Now, I love how the story utilizes Norse beliefs, which then help to shape and influence character motivations. Now, some of the imagery is different and it's almost fantastical, which I think was a little jarring at first, but it still looked great. And the imagery also gives us so much of the story without having to use dialogue, playing on the strengths of Eggers' visual storytelling. And just like in The Witch and The Lighthouse, the Northman uses animals in a prominent way. Now, here, Eggers uses two different animals to assist in the storytelling, playing on the characteristics and names of Amleth and his father. Now, I really enjoy how the animals enhance the story, and I think their inclusion makes them true characters for the scenes that they're in. And speaking of animals, there are several scenes that involve some brutality to animals. Now, most of it isn't shown directly on screen, but if you're sensitive to that, now you're aware. I really enjoyed how the story would conquer complications that arose for Amleth. He'd encounter some sort of setback and then have to figure out how to overcome it, all the while never losing sight of his sworn objective. And these complications allow for some really engaging storytelling that also become very suspenseful. I mean, we know that revenge is his goal, but in order to achieve that final outcome, what will Amleth do to get him closer to accomplishing it? There are some very creative story elements that are introduced to help Amleth on his way. One involves a sword, and everything surrounding it is entertaining and engaging. I love the look of the sword, the way Amleth is able to get it, and then even the unique characteristics of the sword itself. All of these create a richer and more compelling narrative. So overall, The Northman is a captivating revenge tale that creates an environment that is cold and daunting and filled with anger. Alexander Skarsgård is brilliant as Amleth, creating a character who is wickedly strong and intimidating, but also collapsing under the weight of his own anger. The cinematography is beautiful to look at too, with shots that capture the grandeur of the surrounding landscapes, as well as the cold and isolation that also survives there. The story of revenge is told really well, using the time very efficiently to craft a story that is suspenseful and tense without wasting time on elements that don't build out the narrative. And even though some of the dialogue was a little difficult for me to understand, the story as a whole, along with the performances, are absolutely worth any price of admission to see this. There's sex, nudity, not much if any profanity, but a ton of absolutely brutal violence. I give The Northman 5 out of 5 couches. Now, between this and the unbearable weight of massive talent, this has been an awesome week of theater going for me. So what's a great movie that features revenge as its central plot that you really enjoy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.